You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
May is traditionally one of the strongest months of the year and often sets the pace for summer sales. Today, we're taking a look at May sales and the pricing forecast with Vice President of Data and Analytics at J.D. Power, Mr. Tyson Jominy. You've seen him here before on CBT News, but now we got him in the studio. So thank you, Tyson, for making the trip into the studio. Very much appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, it always makes for a little bit better conversation.
Absolutely,
right?
of course.
So let's kind of jump right in here. May, as I mentioned in the opening, is usually one of the strongest, months of the year, and it kind of does kick off the selling season. So where do we stand with May sales? How's it looking?
Yeah, I mean, May is typically the big tent event, right?
Yeah.
It's the start of the summer selling season. We've had January through April. Sales are typically okay in those months. We get to May, and now we're ready to sell, right?
Right.
Well, the good news is for this May, we're going to see sales up about 3% from last year.
Oh, okay.
So sales are still increasing. As a matter of fact, the SAR is going to get to 16.1 million in May, the first time we have been over 16 million since the recovery started. So things are looking good on the top line.
Yeah, that'll work. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's you're only a million away from 17 million, which was the high water mark, right, for the retail sales.
Right. I mean, back in the old days, I think we peaked at 17.4 million.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll quite get back to those levels,
Yeah.
but certainly 16 million, that's in line with what we expect for the full year.
Yeah, for sure. So there's so many other things that to break this down. Talk to us about leasing. Where does that stand today?
Leasing is starting to come back around. Certainly as we look right now, it's been increasing.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of good lease deals out there, so consumers have been gravitating toward that and starting to rebound.
Mm-hmm.
The real challenge with leasing is that starting in July, Q3,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to have the 3-year anniversary of when we ran out of inventory.
Right, right.
And when we had no inventory, we weren't leasing.
Right.
And so now we're going to be missing those lessees coming back to market.
Okay.
And it starts in Q3 and it gets a lot worse in Q4. We don't have a lot of lessees coming back.
Wow. Wow. So what does that mean for the industry? Do you think we're going to start to see greater deals on leasing from the OEMs under subvented programs because of that, to entice that person to say, hey, rather than buying it, you should lease it?
We could, but you know what we saw? A lot of consumers were buying out their leases.
Yeah.
And so now they have vehicles that, they're used to having brand new vehicles. These lessees, they like to get new vehicles. You turn them in after 3 years, you get the latest. Well, they're now 3, 4, 5 years into ownership now of a vehicle.
Right.
So they're not really used to having maintenance and repairs.
That's right.
And buying new tires. I mean, there's all these things that they're not used to. So I think, as a dealer, you look out and you see, wow, we've got a lot fewer lessees coming back to market, but I know who was leasing from me before.
Right.
And really to work those consumers who didn't come back, who bought out their car, reach out to them, find them in the service lanes because they're going to be looking to get a new vehicle.
That's right. That's right. And obviously on the used car side, because of the lack of leasing, you don't have those vehicles to be able to buy at auctions and such that we saw before. I mean, the lease vehicles were just a surplus of vehicles that dealers could count on, right?
Right. I mean, the 3-year off-lease vehicle is the backbone of the used market.
Yeah.
And since we don't have a lot of those coming back,
Yeah.
we're going to see the used market actually contract. I mean, it's going to be smaller in the second half of 24, and 25 is going to be the bottom. We're actually going to see the number of used vehicles continue to decline through 25.
Interesting.
And that will help keep prices higher.
Yeah.
We're going to see prices still come down. It's kind of a difficult concept. It's like prices are going to fall, but yet we have reason to be optimistic because fewer vehicles means we're not going to have a hard landing. We're going to offset that and keep prices higher than they were historically and perhaps higher than they could have gone to.
Okay. You shared a number with me that I want you to share with our audience. What's the average payment today on a vehicle?
The average new vehicle is $727 a month payment.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
basically flat to year-ago levels, which I guess is good news.
Yeah.
But $727.
That's crazy.
In 2019, it was around $500 a month. And nowadays, $500 a month is the average used car payment.
Oh my God.
So if you only have $500 to spend a month, it's still a lot of money, only $500. You're in a used vehicle.
That's right.
New vehicles, $727 a month.
Oh my God. So in order to net out $727, you got to be somewhere around $950, $1,000 a month in income in order to make your car payment. So the first $1,000 into the household or for an individual goes right to the car, and that's before things like gas and insurance, right?
Yeah, for an average family budget, the car is a big part of it. Again, the good news is it hasn't been going up.
Yeah.
We do expect interest rates to start to come down the second half of the year. In fact, we're already seeing it a little bit in new car loans. The rates are down a tiny bit. However, we still need to see more of that. We need cheaper vehicles. We need lower trim and options. We need automakers to start producing, sub 40,000, and if they can, sub $30,000 vehicles would be really great.
That's right. That's right. Where do EVs fall into all of this? I mean, that's been obviously a bone of contention with many dealers to say, the industry jumped too quick at this thing. These are the vehicles that are now stockpiling in our back lots. And so where does that stand?
They're just shy of 9% of all sales right now.
Okay.
And of course, EVs, perhaps more than any other vehicle, are geographically concentrated.
Yes.
In your coastal markets, you'll find more EV sales than the center part of the country.
Right.
So if you're a dealer in Nebraska or Texas, it's going to be a lot harder to sell an EV, of course, than a California or South Florida dealer.
Sure.
So that remains the challenge. We're generally optimistic about EVs.
Mm-hmm.
We think we're going through a period here where there'll be a bit of retrenching. We've seen a lot of automakers back off their statements and their commitments, and that's good to allow the market to adapt and allow it to be more pulled by the consumer rather than pushed on them. And I think that's a good place to be, that we're not going to overproduce those here in the next 24 months.
Right. And in terms of used cars, what should dealers be aware of as we go into the second half of this year?
Well, prices are falling for used cars. I know I mentioned there's a supply constraint coming, but prices will still come down.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're going to be a bit more aggressively priced, and it's going to be harder to source used cars. As mentioned, there's fewer off leases. So you're going to have to be working early, perhaps in the auction lanes, to get the vehicles you want now. I mean, really, in the remainder of Q2, my advice would be work those lanes hard right now and get some inventory. And certainly as vehicles are traded in, perhaps a unit that a dealer may have sent off to auction immediately in the past, you may have to look closer because the supply of those vehicles will be tighter than before.
Yeah, for sure. It's amazing that dealers are now keeping cars on their used car lot that have got 90,000, 100,000. One dealer told me he's got a number of cars that have got over 100,000 miles. Those vehicles usually were shipped off, or in the past, to auctions. It was like you couldn't do anything with it. But that just doesn't seem to be the case now. Dealers are holding on to them and retailing them.
Right. Well, again, the average price of a used monthly payment now is over $500 a month, and so you have to have those cheaper vehicles. Consumers need to get to work. People need to get their families around, so you got to have vehicles at all those price points. More or less, the sub $30,000 price point now is entirely used vehicles.
Right.
Automakers have really gone beyond that. And now they're up over 40K. So the sub 30,000, there's nothing else except used vehicles.
Right, $30,000. I mean, it wasn't long ago that was a nice new car.
The average price of a car not that long ago.
That's right. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And talk to us about the presidential election. Does that have much of an impact on things? I mean, here we are going into a very heated convention, or I should say, election time. Does that play a role? Do people take a wait and see attitude? Let's see who's going to be the president before we go ahead and make a commitment financially?
Are you throwing hardballs because I'm in the studio? Is that what's going on here? Let me.
Maybe.
You want to watch me tap dance here?
That's right.
So generally speaking, presidential elections don't have that great of an impact.
Okay.
However, having said all that,
this is an outlier.
It does feel like this is an outlier because it feels like, depending on which administration takes over or remains, that there could be a divergence of the targets in the United States for EVs, for electrification, adoption. So it seems like perhaps in this election, the outcome may dictate what happens several years down the road. But typically, it's not much of an impact. People kind of take it in stride. If your lease is up or you need a new vehicle, hey, it's summer. You're going to take your family on a road trip. You need a new car. You're really not going to worry about what happens in November.
Right. We're seeing a resurgence of sedans coming back into the marketplace in a big way because I think of affordability, probably first and foremost. But talk to us about that. People are maybe not so turned on by a $90,000 F-150 and saying, wait a second, this is getting kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, really where sedans do well, of course, is their low price. So they typically are priced down about a segment from a comparable SUV. So you're talking about a mid-size SUV. You're talking about a very expensive car. So you could generally get more car for the same money that you'd spend on an SUV. But there are some drawbacks for sedans, of course. They don't have as great utility. But if you are taking a road trip, of course, the fuel economy will be great. And there's some amazing new vehicles out there. I mean, the Prius, it went from you know, sort of dorky commuter car to
know.
sexy and swoopy.
No question.
So there are some very good sedans out there.
Yeah.
But of course, we did just hear the Malibu recently being retired. So we're going to have one fewer, and certainly the domestics are out of the business. But there's still a lot of sedans from a lot of the imports.
Yeah.
And they have bottomed out, really. We're starting to see it just tick back up.
Okay.
You know, they kind of got down to about 20% of sales.
Okay.
Haven't really fallen below that now, so there's a baseline there. We know that at least about a fifth of all consumers want a sedan.
Okay.
And that's probably something to build from.
Yeah, I was going to say that a fifth is pretty substantial. I mean, for dealers that are out there, they need to have these available on the used car lots as well. I mean, it was usually something, you know, dealers or used car managers stayed away from because they thought everybody wanted an SUV and a pickup truck. But, you know, if you're talking about 20% of the vehicles sold in sedans, that's substantial.
Right. 20% is about truck share of the market as well.
Yeah.
So it's nearly 1-to-1 truck sales.
Yeah, for sure. You think we'll have a good selling season for the next 90, 120 days during the summer?
Yeah, I think this summer, all signs point to it being better. There's enough inventory. We show there's about 1.8 million units on the ground.
Okay.
So consumers should start to be finding a lot of what they're looking for.
Okay.
We still believe there's about 1.7 million of pent-up demand out there.
Really?
And that is in the form of consumers waiting for the right price, or perhaps the right color or right trim. And generally, these are lower priced consumers.
Right.
If you have more money to spend, you've probably have already found the vehicle you want.
Okay.
So that sub $40,000 consumer is out there.
Yeah.
And if we have the vehicles, you know, the cheaper trims, the lower trim and options, and keep the price down, there's a lot of consumers still to draw on for this summer.
Fantastic. And what about luxury cars? What does that look like?
Well, if we exclude Tesla, it's looking very good.
Which it looks like Automotive News did. They said they're no longer a luxury brand. They've got cars for 30 grand, for God's sake.
Exactly. So if we exclude Tesla from the definition, luxury sales are actually up this year, looking very strong. Some brands are still kind of late to get inventory. So Lexus, very late. Mercedes, very late to get inventory. They're still just getting back on their feet.
Wow.
And Lexus and Mercedes, two of the biggest names in the luxury space.
For sure.
So it should be a good year for luxury sales as we go forward. Again, we are seeing fantastic mix of industry sales are coming from the luxury space. And it's only going to get better as Lexus and Mercedes pipelines get full again.
Yeah, yeah. And we saw you know, the increase in income for those high net worth individuals out there, which of course fuels the luxury market, right? Even the exotics are doing extremely well.
Yeah, that was something we saw. Certainly started with the pandemic and moved on. The surplus of savings and income, that particularly the highest end, really pushed those sales forward. I mean, we were seeing fantastic gains of the exotics and the luxury, and it still continues to fund it somewhat. You know, where Porsche dealers are not having a bad year.
Sure. Was that a Lamborghini I saw you pull up in at the studio today? Tyson Jominy, Vice President of Data and Analytics at J.D. Power. Thank you so much for joining us on the show and here in the studio. This has been a real treat for us, so thank you. Hopefully we can get you back in here soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.